This is a very serious problem, and we better do something about it.
What does this mean for climate?
Well, the good news is that according to the latest poll, 85% of Americans now believe in global warming.
Last summer, the Arctic melted, okay? We suddenly saw a huge, rapid, uncontrolled melt of the Arctic that by the time it was done this time last year had broken the old record for minimum sea ice extent by 25%. And we've just matched it this year. This week, for the first time ever, both the Northwest and Northeast, first time in 125,000 years, the first time in Homo sapien history, okay? Both the Northwest and Northeast passages are open, and the Arctic is an island surrounded on all sides by water, okay? Suddenly we're seeing, and in the last 18 months seeing in a way we hadn't understood before, just how fast these changes are happening and just how deadly they're going to be. The scientists that I've been talking with for 25 years who have been sober and concerned and alarmed are all of a sudden on the edge of panic because of things like that rapid melt of Arctic ice, like the sudden and remarkable increase in the amount of methane pouring into the atmosphere, methane that's pouring into the atmosphere because as we melt the permafrost in the Arctic, the gas that's trapped underneath can come up through. Yesterday, in Nature, in the periodical Nature, a new study showing that we're now quite plausibly looking at sea level rise, unless we get things under control very fast, at sea level rise of as much as 7 feet in the course of this century. Did you see those pictures from Hurricane Gustav by the time it came to New Orleans? A Category 1 hurricane that missed the city by a long ways, and yet the water was within inches of the top of those levees. Add 7 feet to that and try to figure out what the coastlines of the world look like. This is the first civilization scale challenge that we have ever faced, and it couldn't be grimmer. The positive feedback effects, these loops that are kicking in, are dangerous and scary and daunting. The only good thing that's come out of all of this in the last few months is that the scientists, panicked in a sense as they are, have finally given us a number, a red line, a target, a place which we can't go past. Our foremost climatologist in this country is a NASA scientist named Jim Hansen, a very brave and good man who stood up to a number of attempts by the Bush administration to gag or fire him. And he said last December at the American Geophysical Union and in a paper published in January, he finally gave us a number. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do much math or science today, but these are the only set of numbers you need to remember, okay? Before the Industrial Revolution, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 was 275 parts per million. That's what it had been all of human history. That's the Genesis number, if you want, or the Buddha number, or the Shakespeare number, however you want to think about the world, okay? When we started burning coal and gas and oil, it started going up, and 20 years ago we began to understand that this was going to be devastating and scary. But we didn't know where the red line was, what the number would be. We used to toss around numbers like 550 parts per million just because it was double what it had been before. And that's what the computer models often worked with. What we learned this year from Jim Hansen was that the safe number, and this is the most important number in the world, is 350 parts per million. 350, okay? It is an extremely tough number because we're already past it. We're at 387 parts per million now, and that makes sense. We're past it and the Arctic is melting. We're past it and the methane is flowing into the atmosphere. We're past it and the sea level is starting to rise. We have got right away, to put the brakes on. This is not a problem for your children or your grandchildren. It is the problem of our time. And if we don't get a handle on it in the next few years, if we don't put in place dramatic plans, not only to stop new coal-fired power plants, but to shut down most of the ones that are already operating, if we do not figure out how to leave that carbon in the ground, then we have no chance. Go home and sign up on 350.org so we can involve you in that part of this thing too. We have an outside chance of actually winning this thing. It's outside because the time limit is short, okay? But because we have a chance, it really puts a moral duty on all of us to do what we can. We're not going to be back here in 10 years telling you this same thing, all right? If we've not done it before 10 years is out, there's not going to be much point in talking about it, all right? This is a 1 or 2 or 3 year deal. Go to work now.
I never realized the power of numbers until I actually seen it for myself and seen that many people behind one movement. It was very, very inspiring, very moving. And I think that's why it's very important for leaders to get people involved, no matter who it is. Just get people involved and raise awareness.
And spread the word.
And spread the word.
Take it back to where you're from.
The best way to lobby is to have personal meetings with the members, to demonstrate in front of their local offices back home, not to get too remote from them. It's very important to know their names, know their friends' names, know their relatives, their children, and I think this will be quite a message for them.
My office, other people, the National Academy of Sciences, issued several public reports calling for a cap on greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. And this was covered rather well in major newspapers. It wasn't forgotten or ignored by the press. And this drumbeat call for action from the world scientists has in fact continued for 30 solid years. It didn't stop. But that science was trashed. It was obfuscated. It was called junk science. First they said it was wrong, and then they said it was not clear, and anyhow it was too early to act and that there was no rush. And now they say it will cost too much. Well, my friends, saving the planet does not cost too much.
The evening has produced, among other things in me, an all too familiar realization. Namely, that I flew up here to tell you, among other things, that if I was going to get here guilt-free, I would have had to walk. This is the paradox we're all caught in. And it ought to give us an appropriate sense of complexity. Seems to me I've been, for 35 or 40 years, flying all over the country, telling people, in fact, that they ought to stay at home. That's a hard nut to crack. We're here being political, and we should be. We're in a great political tradition. And one of the great principles of it is that when the government defaults on its responsibilities, the people have to take it up and advise the government.
There is a movement for better use of the farms and ranches and forests. It's a very encouraging movement. It's a competent movement, and it has a lot to show. It is not at this point a massive movement.
It's incredibly moving for me every day to open the email. And now that we've got this global campaign going, and they're just people and things appearing from out of nowhere. So you open the email and you find that 1,500 Buddhist monks and nuns in Ladakh have spent a day talking about 350 parts per million CO2, and they've gone and formed a huge human 350 of the Himalayas in the background. Or you open the email and there's a photograph from a farmer in the Cameroon who's heard about this, and someone has texted him about it, and he's understood, and he and his neighbors have planted 350 trees on the edge of the village and hung a sign on it and taken a picture. And that's moving because you know for damn sure that nobody in Cameroon is causing climate change, and it's moving because you know that they're figuring out that they can play some role in ending this kind of stuff. I mean, it's really quite beautiful and powerful.
There's agreement that there's a very serious problem and we better do something about it. But people somehow have not connected it enough to their actual lives and efforts, so that the imperative of doing something about it becomes not only comprehended, but an impetus to immediate action. That means educational work, it means organizational work. You can't carry out serious education otherwise. And it means a political and other action, whether it's pressures for legislation or demonstrations or resistance or whatever other kinds of action organized groups can take to when there's a critical issue that's has to be addressed, or the results will be, in this case, catastrophic.
And in my own city of Salt Lake, a University of Utah student, Tim DeChristopher, chose not to wait. But to confront through direct action a flawed and fragrant system that profits the interests of oil and gas companies rather than the community at large, a community that includes all life, plants, animals, soils, rivers, and human beings. He raised his hand in the name of civil disobedience, his hand which held a bidder's paddle and exposed the Bush-Cheney administration's midnight maneuver for what it was, a wholesale land grab of our public lands. He said our future is imperiled, and he responded, direct action. We have a history of bravery in this nation, and we must call it forward now. Our future is guaranteed only by the degree of our personal involvement and our commitment to an inclusive justice. To engage in responsive citizenship, we must become citizens who respond passionately. This is how we can make a difference. Secretary of Interior Salazar reversed the decision and freed over 100,000 acres that were slated for oil and gas exploitation outside of Arches and Canyonlands National Parks. This is ultimately about climate change, and I feel it tonight. Climate change is not just the heating up of the planet, but climate change is a change of minds and hearts, inspiring action both politically and personally. Thomas Jefferson said, "I believe in perilous liberty over quiet servitude. May we commit ourselves to perilous liberty." Call it a peaceful uprising, call it the open space of democracy. It's easy to believe that we, the people, have no say, that the powers in Washington will roll over our local, on-the-ground concerns with their corporate energy ties and thumper trucks. It's easy to believe that the American will is only focused on how to get rich, how to be entertained, and how to distract itself from the hard choices we have before us as a nation. I refuse to believe this. The only space I see truly capable of being closed is not the land or our civil liberties, but our own hearts. The human heart is the first home of democracy. It is where we embrace our questions. Can we be equitable? Can we be generous? Can we listen with our whole beings, not just our minds, and offer our attention rather than our opinions? And do we have enough resolve in our hearts to act courageously, relentlessly, without giving up, ever? Trusting our fellow citizens to join us in our determined pursuit of a living democracy. The heart is the house of empathy, whose door opens when we receive the pain of others. This is where bravery lives, where we find our mettle to give and to receive, to love and be loved, to stand in the center of uncertainty with strength, not fear, understanding this is all there is. The heart is the path to wisdom, because it dares to be vulnerable in the presence of power. Our power lies in our love of our homelands. It is time to ask, when will our national culture of self-interest stop cutting the bonds of community to shore up individual gain and instead begin to nourish communal life through acts of giving, not taking? It is time to acknowledge the violence rendered to our souls each time a mountaintop is removed to expose a coal vein in Appalachia, or when a wetland is drained, dredged, and filled for a strip mall. And the time has come to demand an end to the wholesale dismissal of the sacredness of life in all its variety and forms, as we witness the repeated breaking of laws, the relaxing of laws in the sole name of growth and greed. A wild salmon is not the same as a salmon raised in a hatchery, and a prairie dog colony is not a shooting gallery for rifle recreationists, but a culture that has evolved with the prairie since the Pleistocene. At what point do we finally lay our bodies down to say this blatant disregard for biology and wild lives is no longer acceptable?
I was down last year flying over the coal fields of Kentucky and West Virginia, and I saw a site there that if the American people could see it, there would be a revolution in this country. We are cutting down the Appalachian Mountains with these giant bulldozers that are 22 stories high and 2,500 tons of dynamite that we explode in Appalachia every single day, knocking the tops off these mountains in a jet, dumping them into the adjacent river valleys. And when my father was fighting strip mining back in 1968, he told me the reason that he said this is going to destroy the environment, it's going to destroy the capacity of those communities to ever regenerate any kind of economic activity, and it's also the reason they're doing it, it's their way of destroying the unions and firing workers. And there were 114,000 miners in West Virginia when he told me that, and today there's 12,000 left, and they're producing the same amount of coal, but they're not unionized. When those coal utilities burn that coal that puts acid rain and mercury and ozone and particulates into the air that poison our children, that make them be born with autism, that reduce their IQs, that reduce worker days, that destroy the lakes in the Adirondacks, that deprive me of the capacity to fish in my own home state, even after I already paid for the fishing license. Those impacts impose costs on the rest of us that should, in a true free market economy, be reflected in the price of General Electric, of the utilities, Southern companies or whatever's, or Reliant Energy's product when it makes it into the marketplace. But what these companies do, which is what all polluters do, is they use political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay their production costs. And, you know, I talked with Jim Hightower the other day, who's going to talk here tonight. We were talking about the free market, and he said, yeah, the free market is a great thing. We should try it sometime. We don't have a free market economy in this country anymore.
The future of the climate rests on the future of coal, because coal is the most carbon intensive of the fuels. And China has recently become the foremost greenhouse gas emitting country on the basis of its coal dependency. It's not that the Chinese are using more energy than the US, they're not, but they're using a lot more coal. They're using twice as much coal as we are, and that's what's making the difference. So knowing that there's less coal and that oil production is going to be headed downward is good news for the climate. Does that mean we don't have to worry about climate change anymore? Unfortunately not. The latest climate studies are suggesting that we have underestimated climate sensitivity to greenhouse gases. And so therefore we're seeing some of these tipping points where reinforcing feedback loops are kicking in with regard to the acidity of the world's oceans, with regard to the melting of the permafrost, the tundra in northern regions that's releasing methane gas into the atmosphere, which is 20 times as powerful a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. We're seeing the melting of the North Polar ice cap, which is uncovering black ocean water, which absorbs more heat from the sun and therefore just accelerates the process of warming that's already happening.
I think that global warming and climate change is simply a symptom of a much larger problem, and that larger problem is that we live in an unsustainable society and we have an unsustainable economy. That all of the major issues that we see confronting us today are symptoms of that same basic problem. When we talk about global warming, when we talk about declining fossil energy, peak oil is a major issue. We see it at the gas pumps and we see it at other places. We talk about running out of drinkable water. when we talk about endangered species or loss of biological diversity, what we're doing is we're seeing the symptoms of an economy that is simply placing demands upon nature, upon the earth, that the earth simply cannot long endure.
There have been a series of assessment reports about climate change and in particular on global warming and the role of humans in climate change. To use a medical analogy, what we have done in the IPCC is to carry out a detailed diagnosis of the vital signs of the planet Earth. And what we have found is that the planet is running a fever, and the prognosis is that that fever is apt to get much worse. I'd like to make a number of points with regard to global warming. In my talks, I often say, global warming, coming ready or not. Global warming is already with us. It's caused by human activities, mainly from the burning of fossil fuels. And so you heard Nancy earlier addressing one aspect of what you might do about global warming, but there's actually a number of facets to that. In the past year, we've seen a number of events in the climate system that I think have a global warming, I think we can demonstrate quite clearly, have a global warming component. A year ago, or roughly a year ago, in September of last year, we saw spectacularly reduced sea ice in the Arctic. And of course, this threatens the polar bear and other species in the Arctic. A polar bear is one of the poster childs of global warming. Record low values, 20% lower than the previous lowest year, which was 2005. Earlier this year, there were many wildfires in California, and then again this summer, wildfires, one of the consequences of extra heat and drying that goes on. This year, we've seen extensive flooding along the Mississippi River and the Cedar River in Iowa. There's been record high amounts of rainfall and flooding in Iowa, Ohio, and in Missouri this year, very much related to global warming. There's been a record number of tornadoes and a record number of deaths due to tornadoes in 2008 in the United States, over 100 deaths. They also have a component of global warming. In 2007, for the first time, I want to talk a little bit about hurricanes in these next two items. The general thought in the media has been that there was not much happened last year with regard to hurricanes, but there were 2 Category 5 storms that made landfall, not in the United States, but in Central America. And so we don't talk about them. And yet it's the first time that 2 Category 5 storms have made landfall in the Americas. Earlier this year, there was Typhoon Nagas in Myanmar, Burma, caused absolute devastation and a huge number of deaths. And Typhoon Fengshan hit the Philippines, also with a huge amount of devastation and deaths. And both of these sort of signal the fact that we're not prepared to deal with some of the consequences of global warming. And in this country, of course, we've seen that from Hurricane Katrina. This year in the Atlantic, Hurricane Bertha has broken several records. Firstly, for how far east it formed and how early it formed in July, and it's the longest lasting July hurricane on record. And then just recently, we've had Hurricane Faye, which made landfall 4 times in Florida, and it's caused tremendous amount of flooding in Florida, and now it's working its way up the eastern seaboard. The most spectacular, I think, sign that global warming, of a warming planet, is the rise in sea level that's going on. And it's currently rising at around about a rate of a foot a century. So global warming is happening, and it's very likely due to human activities, to use the words of the IPCC. It's not just a threat for the future, it's actually happening now. And we can't get rid of the carbon dioxide and the other greenhouse gases that are causing this problem. Carbon dioxide mainly arises from fossil fuel burning. It has a long lifetime, over a century. And so we have to live with what we've already put there. We can take a little bit out with trees, but then what do we do with the trees? In fact, we tend to use them and we burn them, and the trees put the carbon dioxide right back into the atmosphere. Growing trees only takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere if we then put the trees into, say, a nice wooden church, and it stays here forever. But if we use the wood in any shape or form for paper and it gets into a landfill, it goes back into the atmosphere. It's not taken out of the system. The emissions are accelerating, especially from China and also India. This is a global problem. What China does to the atmosphere affects us. It's a global commons problem. And leadership in the United States in this area has been lacking in the last 8 years. The climate system itself has a lot of inertia in the oceans and in the ice sheets. And as a result, they respond very slowly. We still have not seen the full manifestations of the global warming that is already in the pipeline. And it's guaranteed that we're going to have at least another 1 degree Fahrenheit increase in global mean temperatures. And locally, that means a lot more. The changes we make now mainly have benefits 30 years from now and in the future. This is a problem that has long time constants attached to it, which means we have to start now in order to benefit the next generation and your grandchildren. Our predictions at NCAR and in the IPCC call for substantial climate changes into the future and potentially quite devastating changes by the year 2100. By the year 2100, planet Earth could be a very different planet. And by that I mean that ecosystems that currently exist, forests, the crops that we can grow now, would no longer be viable in places where they exist now.
Recently, there's been some publicity about measuring carbon dioxide, and we're told that there's a number we should be concerned about, 350.
Currently, we're actually at 380. So, and at current rates, we will double pre-industrial levels to about 550 parts per million by volume by about 2060 or maybe even 2050, the way in which China is increasing their emissions. Double the carbon dioxide from pre-industrial times. And so these have large consequences associated with not just increases in temperature and increases in heat waves, but also changes in storms and flooding and changes in hurricanes and changes in the environment that we're all living in and the animals and all of the ecosystems are living in. And that's what makes them potentially no longer viable. And so it's really a threat, a major threat. It's a long-term threat. It's not one that's devastating right now. The devastation or the crisis that exists right now is the fact that we're not addressing it.
On October 24th, all over the world, people will be making symbolic witness, spreading that number 350 across the planet. There'll be climbers high up in the Himalayas and divers down off the Great Barrier Reef and people on Easter Island putting banners on the noses of those big stone guys and on and on and on.